Welcome to TradeTheNBI.com. This is Sean. This report is for the 2nd of August. And yesterday we had just a little bit of softness. We were still in a decent position from an S&P standpoint, right at the 33 with the magenta. But we could already tell that we were getting a little bit of softness from DOC readings here. We didn't have really any short-term buyer activity in the steel, and it was a question of whether or not the meeting of cyan to green, and in this case, now we have the full DOC spread starting in the post-market uh, activity or the beginning of the day, whichever way you want to look at it for today. And that softness has been a declining shakeout, but this is why I put the ABM lines in there the other day when we were up here, because the given retrace would be to right about that level, and that's exactly where we're at this particular point. Now, follow through with this increase in short activity potentially has the power to bring it even further down there. The question was whether the S&P was going to hold up the NASDAQ because it had been expressing much weaker readings, or whether or not we would get some softening here from the S&P, and whether the Nasdaq then would turn around, sort of like this back and forth mean reversion, because the S&P has been stronger than the Nasdaq has been, and sort of holding things up. And now you can see, even with the Nasdaq move, not as severe, but putting it, relatively speaking, within the same range as the Morganacci lines. And you can see the Nasdaq has been weak. We look at that shakeout. The S&P looking pretty even with its shakeout histogram, but this has been much weaker all the way along, and matching highs, lower shakeout doesn't always bode well. You just have to wait for it to develop into something more significant. And we can see that from the DOC standpoint. We'd already had red DOC below zero, and so this creates that crossover where shorts have significantly overtaken, or at least selling has overtaken the bull side of the situation at this particular point. So that's given us just the softness within this range. So nothing, I think, overly dramatic. It's just filling right in there. And that oil finally catching up to the bond market, recognizing that rates aren't going to get any softer, and the expectation of higher. So this is finally that sort of capitulation from some of this craziness that we saw with this idea that everyone thought the Fed was just going to collapse and fade into it, and they're not. But this has been really the trigger for it all. And we talked about this when we were in the comfortable range. There was a possibility the Fed didn't have to get more aggressive or do anything, but once this started to peak, and my concern right there was when we broke out of this range, and I said once we reach 80, and that would be the trigger point. And sure enough, we can see the market reacting to it appropriately, because it puts a lot of strain on the situation. Euro's still holding up dramatically well, given what we're seeing from that, and they're doing their best because they're raising rates into a weak economy in that, so they really don't have much of a chance of doing any better than this. So it's been impressive from that standpoint, at least for their ability to hold that up. Gold, when the market goes into sell-off range, usually it's some of that softness, but it's going to have to turn around once that recognition for the oil move, and if we start to see it in prices. Now it could take a few weeks for it to transition, but at this particular stage, still in the softness mode with that white NBI lead, and magenta is still always below the cyan during this, the yellow below this whole move right here. So fairly clean from that trend standpoint. When we looked at the crypto side of things, not a whole lot of activity. It's pretty much benign. And again, I think a lot of this is that hold up with this dramatic increased move towards, well, at least the talk of digital currency. And that's quite disruptive, because we all know they're not going to allow some other type of currency if you're developing these national currencies. And it seems to be the trend that everything's pushing towards. So for the 50K standpoint, never could reach the full peak of things, and we were just going back and forth and kept having these little points of white MBI, but it was still held up nicely with the magenta until we got towards the end of the day yesterday. And that was the trigger point where MBI white overtook. And we had already seen some earlier shorts in it. It just a little bit too soon from there. And then boom, uh, filling all the way back down to the dip below the red line here. And that's where the pre-market has taken things. Nothing overly dramatic, and you can see there as we ended up with the close, and then boom, as soon as we started with the pre-market, things started to clear out a bunch of stops. This is going to wipe out a bunch of weekends, and it's sort of a typical thing that we see from there, and we're getting a little bit of back and forth with that. So we'll see if we're able to see any kind of push run towards the open, but overall, they're filling everything back in, back and forth, and it's just going to continue that way. Things have gotten ahead of themselves, and they're just filling back in at this particular stage. Continuation of it, though, we're definitely going to see from a 50K standpoint and from the daily, whether we're able to see that consistent short if. With the readings of the MBI white spiking up in that, and I think that will be a little bit more of a directional trade at that particular stage. So all good from now. As always, though, look for me in the Skype chat. I'll post anything relevant as it happens. Trade well.